From the moment I could understand words, I noticed that my parents treated my older brothers differently. They laughed when my brothers spoke, encouraged them when they stumbled, and gave them the biggest portions of food at dinner. For me, their voices were colder. My father would often say, "You are just a girl. You will marry into another family one day. Why should we waste resources on you?" My mother, who should have been my safe place, only nodded in agreement. At age 7, when I fell sick with a terrible fever, my parents refused to take me to the clinic. My mother told me, "We can't spend money on hospital bills for you when your brothers need school fees." I remember lying in bed, shivering, hearing my brothers playing outside, and realizing my life was less valued simply because I was born a girl. School was not a priority for me. While my brothers wore neat uniforms and carried new books, I was given torn exercise books from the previous year. Sometimes, I had to beg neighbors for a pencil. One day, I asked my father why I couldn't have the same treatment. His response stung like a slap. "A female child's education is a waste. Your job is to learn how to cook, clean, and keep a home." So instead of going to classes regularly, I spent my days cooking for the family, washing clothes, and caring for my younger brothers. But deep inside, a small flame burned. I wanted to learn. I wanted more than the kitchen walls and the yard outside our house. Whenever I could, I borrowed books from a kind neighbor, Auntie Sharon, who was a retired teacher. She noticed how I stared at her shelves and invited me to read. Sometimes she even taught me after my chores. My parents didn't know. They thought I was fetching water or running errands. One day, my father caught me reading and tore the book in half. "This nonsense will make you stubborn. You will not disgrace this family," he shouted. My heart broke, but my spirit didn't. That day, I promised myself, one day I would stand on my own feet, without needing their approval. When I turned 16, my parents began talking about marrying me off to a man twice my age. They said he had money and would take the burden off them. I refused, and for the first time in my life, I shouted back, "I am not a burden. I am a human being. I deserve to live my life." That night, my father told me to leave the house if I didn't agree. I packed a small bag, my heart pounding, and walked away into the unknown. I stayed with Auntie Sharon, who offered me shelter. She helped me find a small cleaning job and encouraged me to enroll in evening classes. It was hard, working during the day, studying at night, but I finally felt free. I met people who believed in me, people who didn't care that I was a girl, only that I had potential. And I kept my promise to myself. I would never let being female define my worth. Living with Auntie Sharon was the first time I experienced what care felt like. She didn't have much, but she always made sure I ate before going to work. One morning, as we had tea together, she looked at me and said, "Child, your parents' rejection is not your fault. You must never believe you were born less because you are a girl." Her words stayed with me like a blanket against the cold. She enrolled me in adult literacy classes. I was shy at first. Most of my classmates were younger than me, but I reminded myself that every letter I learned was a step toward freedom. Working as a cleaner in a small hotel wasn't glamorous. My hands were often raw from scrubbing floors, and some guests treated me like I was invisible. But every time I received my pay, no matter how small, I smiled. That money meant I could buy my own soap, my own books, and even contribute to my school fees. One day, my boss at the hotel, a middle-aged man named Mr. Chucks, saw me reading a borrowed mathematics book during my break. "Why bother?" he asked. "A girl like you should be thinking about marriage, not equations." I closed the book gently and replied, "Because I want a life that belongs to me." Months later, I met my mother at the market. She looked surprised to see me. "So you're still alive," she said flatly. "Your father thought you would come crawling back." I felt anger rise, but I stayed calm. "I'm not crawling back. I'm building my life." She scoffed and turned away, but I noticed her eyes lingering on the neat clothes I wore and the bag of groceries in my hand. By the time I turned 18, I could read and write fluently. I passed my basic exams, something my parents never believed I could achieve. When I told Auntie Sharon, she hugged me tightly.
See,
"You were never the problem," she whispered. I decided then that I wanted to go further, to complete my secondary education and maybe even attend university. But that meant more work, more savings, and more strength. One evening, a message came through a neighbor. My father had sent word that if I didn't come home soon, he would disown me completely. I laughed bitterly. He had already abandoned me. When I told Auntie Sharon, she sighed. "Child, be careful. Pride can make people dangerous." At the hotel, a frequent guest named Mr. Peggy noticed my diligence. He asked why I worked so hard, and I told him my story. "You remind me of my younger sister," he said. "If you want, I can sponsor your school fees." It sounded too good to be true, so I hesitated. But after weeks of careful thought, and with Auntie Sharon's advice, I accepted, with the condition that I would pay him back someday. Returning to a formal classroom as an adult was both exciting and intimidating. Some students mocked me for being too old for their class, but I ignored them. My focus was on my books, my future. One day, during a break, a classmate asked, "Why are you stressing yourself like this?" I smiled. "Because I've already lived the alternative, and I don't want to go back." One Sunday, I overheard market women gossiping about my family. My father had fallen ill, and my brothers were quarreling over who would take care of him. None of them wanted the responsibility. It struck me then, after all his preference for them, they were not willing to sacrifice for him. Weeks later, my parents showed up at the hotel. My father looked frail, my mother nervous. "We need help," my mother said. "Your brothers have refused to support us." I was silent for a moment, then replied, "You taught me I was not worth your care because I'm a girl. Now you want my help because the boys you chose over me turned their backs." That night, I thought deeply. I could have turned them away, just as they did to me. But Auntie Sharon's kindness had taught me something. Compassion doesn't mean weakness. The next day, I bought them food and paid part of my father's medical bills. I made it clear, though, I am helping you because it is right, not because I have forgotten what you did. And as I walked away, I realized I was no longer the powerless girl they once abandoned. I was a woman who had carved her own destiny. Helping my parents stirred talk in the neighborhood. Some said I was foolish for forgiving them. Others called me strong. At the hotel, a co-worker, Beatrice, said, "If it were me, I would have let them suffer. They didn't care when you needed them." I replied quietly, "Hatred is heavy to carry. I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for me." But deep inside, part of me still hurt. Forgiveness didn't erase the scars. It only meant I was choosing not to let the pain control me. One afternoon, my mother came alone to see me at the hotel. She avoided my eyes for a long time before speaking. "Your father's friend has a son, a good man. He's ready to marry you. You don't have to keep struggling like this." I laughed bitterly. "Now you call me a good wife material? Years ago you said I was a waste of resources." She tried to convince me, promising the man would take care of me, but I told her firmly, "I'm building my life my own way. I will not hand it over to someone else to control." At the hotel, my dedication paid off. Mr. Chucks, who once doubted me, promoted me to a front desk assistant. It meant better pay and less physical strain. When I told Auntie Sharon, she smiled proudly. "See how far you've come. This is only the beginning." That night, I stayed up late, filling a notebook with plans, savings goals, education timelines, and ideas for starting my own small business someday. One evening, my father sent for me. I hesitated but went, finding him lying weakly on a mat. He stared at me for a long time before speaking. I was wrong, he admitted quietly. I thought sons would carry my name and take care of me, but they only think of themselves. You have done more than they ever will. Hearing those words was both healing and painful. I nodded, not ready to say much. With my savings growing, I started buying second-hand clothes to resell. At first, I sold them to hotel staff, then to customers in the neighborhood. One customer, impressed by my neat packaging, said, "You should open a shop. You have a gift for business." The idea planted itself in my heart. But opening a shop meant bigger risks, and I still had my education to complete. One Saturday, I visited home to drop off groceries. My eldest brother met me at the gate, sneering. "So now you're the one feeding our parents. Do you think you're better than us?" I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "No, but I am willing to do what you won't." He had no reply. That day, I realized my strength intimidated them, not because I was female, but because I had become independent. After months of evening classes, I finally sat for my exams. Weeks later, I received my results, and I had passed with scores high enough to apply for university. When I told Auntie Sharon, she cried tears of joy. "You've turned your pain into power. I wish every girl knew she could do this." I decided to study business administration, hoping it would help me run a shop and maybe even a company someday. University life was not easy. I still worked part-time at the hotel and continued my small clothing business to pay fees. Sometimes I slept only 4 hours a night. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered my father's old words, "Education for a girl is a waste," and used them as fuel to keep going. One day, my mother called in panic. My father's condition had worsened, and they needed money for an emergency operation. My brothers refused to contribute, saying they had their own responsibilities. I sent the money without hesitation. Not because I forgot the past, but because I refused to let bitterness dictate my actions. After my father's surgery, he called me again. His voice was weak, but different, gentler. "I used to think a female child brought no honor to her parents," he said. "But you have proved me wrong. You are my greatest blessing." Tears filled my eyes, not because of the praise, but because I had finally earned respect without becoming what they wanted me to be. At that moment, I knew my journey wasn't just about survival. It was about rewriting the meaning of being a female child in my family's history. By my third year in university, I was running my clothing business more seriously, balancing it with part-time work at the hotel. One day, the hotel owner himself visited and heard about my story from Mr. Chucks. He called me into his office. "You are the kind of staff we wish we could clone," he said warmly. "When you graduate, I want to offer you a management trainee position." It felt like the universe was rewarding every sleepless night and every tear I had shed in silence. As my father's health slowly improved, my mother began visiting me more often. She started bringing small gifts, vegetables from the farm, homemade snacks, and sometimes she stayed to talk. "One afternoon," she said softly, "I didn't fight for you when your father refused to care for you. I thought staying quiet was the safest thing. I'm sorry." I didn't answer right away. I just took her hand and squeezed it. Some wounds don't heal with words, but with consistent actions. When I finally graduated, I stood on the stage in my gown, looking out at the crowd. Auntie Sharon sat in the front row, clapping proudly. My parents were there too, surprisingly. My father's eyes were watery, though he tried to hide it. After the ceremony, he hugged me for the first time in years. "You have brought honor to our name," he whispered. The little girl in me, who once craved that approval, felt a bittersweet victory. With my savings and the small profit from my clothing business, I finally rented a small shop. I painted the walls myself, bought a simple counter, and displayed my clothes neatly. The day I opened, Auntie Sharon cut the ribbon and prayed for my success. I worked hard, treating every customer with respect. Word spread, and soon my shop was attracting more people than I had dreamed possible. One evening, my eldest brother came to my shop looking uncomfortable. He had lost his job and was in debt. "Can you help me, sister?" he asked quietly. I looked at him for a long time before replying, "I will help you, but not with money. I'll teach you how to run a business." It wasn't revenge. It was teaching him the same independence I had fought to gain. The hotel kept their promise and offered me the management trainee position. I now balance my shop with office work, learning leadership skills. It was exhausting, but it was also the life I had once thought impossible. Sometimes, when I passed schoolgirls in uniform, I smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, another girl was fighting the same battle I had once fought. A year later, my father's health declined again. On his final night, he called me close. "I wish I had seen your worth earlier," he said weakly. "Forgive me for the years I wasted." I took his hand and whispered, "I forgave you long ago. Rest now." He passed away peacefully that night. At his burial, I stood before the mourners and spoke honestly. My father didn't believe in the value of a female child. But I stand here today as proof that daughters can build, provide, and protect just as much as sons. The worth of a child is not in their gender, but in their heart. The crowd was silent, then erupted in applause. Inspired by my journey, I started a small scholarship program for girls in my community whose parents refused to educate them. I named it the Auntie Sharon Fund, in honor of the woman who had rescued me when no one else would. The first time I saw a girl graduate because of that fund, I cried, because I knew the cycle was breaking. Years later, as I locked up my now expanded shop and walked to my car, I thought about the girl I once was, scared, rejected, told she was worth nothing. Now I stood tall, not because my parents finally saw my value, but because I had seen it all along. And I realized, my greatest victory was not proving them wrong, it was proving myself right.